The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the Riverside County Courthouse's 7-year-old Lily Martinez sat motionless in the backseat of Detective Sarah Kim's unmarked police car. Her small fingers were wrapped tightly around the thick collar of Rex, a magnificent German shepherd whose piercing blue eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older than his 3 years. The dog's black and tan coat gleamed in the filtered sunlight, but it was his unwavering attention to the little girl beside him that truly caught the eye of anyone who observed them together. Lily's dark hair hung like a curtain around her face, partially obscuring the deep brown eyes that had seen far too much for someone so young. She wore a simple navy blue dress that Detective Kim had purchased just yesterday, along with white tights and black patent leather shoes that looked almost comically large on her tiny feet. But it wasn't her appearance that made people stop and stare. It was the profound silence that seemed to emanate from her small frame, a silence that spoke volumes about the trauma she carried within. "We're here, sweetheart," Detective Kim said softly, turning to face the pair in the back seat. Sarah had been working with abused children for nearly 15 years, but she had never encountered a case quite like Lily's. The little girl hadn't spoken a single word since the night 6 months ago when SWAT officers found her hiding in a bedroom closet during her father's arrest. The only sounds she made were soft whimpers in her sleep, and even those had gradually faded as her bond with Rex grew stronger. Rex's ears perked up at the detective's voice, and he turned his magnificent head toward the courthouse building, as if he could sense the weight of what lay ahead. What Detective Kim didn't know, what nobody except Lily knew, was that Rex understood every word being spoken around him. More than that, he had developed an extraordinary ability to read the subtle micro-expressions and barely perceptible gestures that had become Lily's new language. It had started 3 weeks after Rex arrived at the children's home where Lily was temporarily placed. The therapy dog had been assigned to help her cope with severe PTSD and selective mutism, conditions that had developed after witnessing unspeakable horrors during her father's criminal activities. At first, their interaction was typical. Rex would lie beside her bed at night, providing comfort through his mere presence. But then something remarkable began to happen. Lily discovered that Rex could read her in ways that no human ever had. A slight twitch of her left index finger meant she was feeling anxious. A barely perceptible tightening around her eyes indicated fear. When she pressed her lips together in a particular way, it meant she needed space. And when she performed a complex sequence of micro-movements, a soft exhale followed by a gentle touch to Rex's left ear, then a subtle shift of her weight, it meant she sensed danger nearby. The communication system they developed was so sophisticated that it resembled a secret code. Rex learned to distinguish between 27 different finger positions, each conveying a specific emotion or need. He memorized the meaning behind various breathing patterns, the significance of how she positioned her feet, and even the subtle changes in her scent that indicated different emotional states. In return, Rex developed his own vocabulary of responses. A gentle nudge with his nose meant reassurance. A specific positioning of his body created a protective barrier, and his ears could telegraph warnings about approaching strangers before Lily even noticed them. Dr. Amanda Foster, the child psychologist overseeing Lily's case, had initially been skeptical about the unconventional therapy approach. But she couldn't argue with the results. While Lily still hadn't spoken, her nightmares had decreased. She was eating regularly, and most importantly, she seemed to be developing trust again, at least with Rex. What Dr. Foster didn't realize was that Lily and Rex were having full conversations every day, just not in any language she could recognize. As they sat in the car outside the courthouse, Lily performed a series of almost invisible movements. She pressed her thumb against Rex's collar twice, then relaxed her shoulders in a specific pattern. Rex responded immediately, shifting his positioned so that his body created a barrier between Lily and the courthouse entrance. He had just told her, in their secret language, that he sensed tension and potential threats ahead, but that he would protect her no matter what happened. Detective Kim noticed the interaction, but interpreted it as simple comfort-seeking behavior. She had no way of knowing that she had just witnessed a conversation as complex as any verbal exchange. Rex had informed Lily about the unusual number of people gathered inside the building, the presence of several individuals whose scent patterns indicated high stress levels, and most concerning of all, the faint but unmistakable scent of someone from their past, someone Rex remembered from the night of Marcus Martinez's arrest. Lily's foster parents, Tom and Grace Peterson, approached the car from the courthouse steps. Tom carried a manila folder containing character references and progress reports, while Grace held a small backpack with Lily's comfort items, a worn teddy bear, a drawing pad, and Rex's favorite treats. They had been caring for Lily for 6 months, and in that time, they had witnessed the remarkable bond between girl and dog, though they too were unaware of the sophisticated communication system the pair had developed. "Good morning, Lily," Grace said softly as she opened the car door. "Rex looks very handsome today. Are you ready to go inside?" Lily looked at Rex, and in a movement so subtle that Grace missed it entirely, she brushed her pinky finger against the dog's front paw. Rex's response was immediate, but equally discreet. He touched his nose to her hand, a gesture that meant, "I'm with you always." As they walked up the courthouse steps, Lily's secret language with Rex would soon be put to the ultimate test. Neither of them knew that this day would forever change, not only their lives, but also the very understanding of what communication between human and animal could achieve. The silent conversation they were about to have in Judge Harrison's courtroom would leave everyone present questioning everything they thought they knew about the bonds that connect us all. Today, their secret language would speak louder than words ever could. Detective Sarah Kim's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her badge and straightened her navy blazer before entering the courthouse. The weight of what she had discovered over the past 3 months felt heavier with each step she took toward Judge Harrison's courtroom. As a 15-year veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department's Special Victims Unit, Sarah had seen cases that would haunt most people for life, but nothing had prepared her for the intricate web of horror she had uncovered surrounding little Lily Martinez. It had started as a routine drug bust. Marcus Martinez was supposed to be just another mid-level dealer operating out of a rundown apartment complex in East LA. The anonymous tip had come in on a Tuesday evening. Suspicious activity, possible drug manufacturing, children on the premises. Sarah had expected to find the usual scene, a small-time operation, maybe some marijuana plants, possibly a meth lab. What she found instead was something that would forever change how she viewed the intersection of organized crime and child exploitation. The apartment itself had been a masterpiece of deception. The front rooms looked like a normal, if somewhat messy, family home. Children's toys were scattered across the living room floor, school backpacks hung by the door, and family photos lined the mantelpiece. But it was what lay behind a false wall in the back bedroom that revealed the true nature of Marcus's operation. Hidden cameras, detailed flight schedules, fake identification documents, and most disturbing of all, training materials designed to teach children how to carry contraband through airport security without detection. Sarah's discovery of the child trafficking ring had been accidental. While processing evidence from Marcus's apartment, she had found a coded ledger that initially appeared to contain drug transaction records. But as she worked with FBI cryptographers to decode the entries, a horrifying pattern emerged. The products being moved weren't drugs at all. They were children. 12 kids, ranging in age from 6 to 14, had been systematically trained to transport narcotics across state and international borders. They traveled with fake families, carried specially designed luggage with hidden compartments, and had been coached to behave like normal tourist children while carrying thousands of dollars worth of illegal substances. Lily Martinez wasn't just a victim of neglect or abuse. She was a trained courier in her father's sophisticated smuggling operation. The revelation had made Sarah physically ill when she first understood its implications. This 7-year-old child, who now couldn't speak above a whisper, had been crossing international borders with hidden drug shipments since she was 4 years old. The psychological manipulation required to make a preschooler complicit in such activities was almost incomprehensible. But what made Sarah's blood run cold as she entered the courthouse gallery was the man she spotted in the back row. Vincent Torres sat with his baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans that made him look like any other concerned family member attending a hearing. But Sarah recognized him instantly from the surveillance photos that had been plastered across her desk for months. Vincent had been Marcus's business partner, the logistical mastermind behind the child courier operation, and according to FBI intelligence, he was still actively running the network even after Marcus's arrest. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the implications of Vincent's presence. He wasn't here out of concern for Lily's welfare. He was here to assess the threat she posed to his continued operations. During her months of investigation, Sarah had learned that Vincent was paranoid about loose ends, and in the criminal world, a traumatized child who might eventually recover her memories, and her voice represented the ultimate loose end. She carefully took her seat 3 rows ahead of Vincent, close enough to keep him in her peripheral vision, while maintaining the appearance of someone simply attending the hearing. Sarah's training kicked in as she began cataloging every detail about his appearance and behavior. He was clean-shaven now, having previously worn a full beard in all the surveillance photos. His weight had increased noticeably, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses that hadn't been part of his previous appearance. But it was definitely him. The scar running from his left ear to his jawline was unmistakable. As Sarah watched Vincent, she noticed something that made her stomach clench with anxiety. His attention wasn't focused on the legal proceedings or even on Lily herself. Instead, his eyes kept returning to Rex, the German shepherd who sat vigilantly beside the little girl. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand why Vincent would be fixated on the therapy dog. And then a chilling possibility occurred to her. During her investigation, Sarah had learned that Marcus's operation used dogs as part of their security system. The traffickers employed specially trained animals to detect law enforcement presence and to identify potential witnesses or threats. If Vincent was studying Rex with such intensity, it could only mean one thing. He was trying to determine whether the therapy dog posed some kind of operational risk to his criminal network. The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. Rex wasn't just Lily's emotional support, he was a witness. The dog had been present during Marcus's criminal activities, and if the animal had been trained to recognize patterns or individuals associated with the trafficking operation, Rex might represent an unexpected threat to Vincent's continued freedom. Sarah had heard stories of drug detection dogs being targeted by criminals, but she had never considered that a therapy dog might become a target simply because of what he had observed. Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her service weapon as she watched Vincent shift in his seat. The man's body language suggested he was preparing to move, and Sarah realized with growing alarm that she might be witnessing the preliminaries to an attempted kidnapping or worse. Vincent Torres hadn't come to the courthouse to observe Lily's custody hearing. He had come to eliminate a threat, and that threat included both the little girl and her remarkable canine companion. As Sarah prepared to quietly alert courthouse security about Vincent's presence, she noticed something that made her pause. Rex's ears had perked up, and the dog's head had turned slightly in Vincent's direction. The therapy dog's behavior suggested he had detected something, a familiar scent, perhaps, or simply the instinctive recognition of danger. Whatever the case, Sarah realized that she wasn't the only one in the courtroom who had identified Vincent Torres as a threat. The question now was whether she could neutralize the danger before Vincent made his move, and whether Rex's remarkable bond with Lily would prove to be their salvation or their downfall. Elena Martinez's legs felt like they might give out as she walked toward the witness stand. 5 years of hiding, 5 years of living under assumed names and looking over her shoulder had led to this moment. Her hands shook as she placed her right hand on the Bible and raised her left, swearing to tell the truth, a truth so devastating that it had cost her everything she held dear, including her daughter's childhood. Elena's appearance was a stark contrast to the vibrant woman in the family photos that had been entered as evidence. Where once she had long, lustrous black hair and warm brown eyes that sparkled with life, now she was thin and pale, her hair cut short and dyed auburn in an attempt to disguise her identity. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. The years in witness protection had aged her beyond her 32 years, but it was the weight of guilt and grief that truly made her appear older. "Please state your name for the record," requested Judge Harrison, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had presided over thousands of cases, but sensed this one was different. "Elena Maria Rodriguez," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I legally changed my name from Elena Martinez 5 years ago when I entered the Federal Witness Protection Program." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Harrison raised her eyebrows slightly. Witness protection cases were rare in family court, and the implications were immediately understood by everyone present. This wasn't just a custody dispute. This was something far more serious. Elena's attorney, Michael Chun, approached the witness stand with documents that had been sealed by federal order until just hours before the hearing. "Mrs. Rodriguez, can you please tell the court why you disappeared from your daughter's life 5 years ago?" Elena's eyes found Lily in the gallery, and her heart shattered anew. Her little girl, who had been barely 2 years old when Elena was forced to flee, now sat rigidly beside her foster parents, with that beautiful German shepherd pressed against her side. Lily's face showed no recognition, no emotion, just the blank stare of a child whose trust in the world had been systematically destroyed. "I discovered that my husband, Marcus Martinez, was using our daughter as a drug courier," Elena said, her voice gaining strength despite the tears streaming down her face. "When I confronted him about it, when I threatened to go to the police, he tried to kill me." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispered conversations. Judge Harrison banged her gavel for order, but Elena continued speaking, desperate to get her story out. "Marcus had been training Lily since she could walk. He told me it was just daddy-daughter trips, vacations to visit his family in Mexico. But I started noticing things. Lily would come back from these trips withdrawn, frightened. She would have nightmares about airports and strangers. One night, she was playing with her dolls, and I heard her whispering instructions about hiding things in suitcases, about acting happy when the uniform people asked questions." Elena rolled up her sleeves, revealing a network of faded scars that crisscrossed her forearms like a roadmap of violence. "When I confronted Marcus, he said I knew too much. He attacked me with a knife in our own kitchen while Lily was sleeping. Upstairs, I managed to escape, but he found me at the hospital. He said if I ever contacted the police or tried to take Lily, he would kill us both. He had connections everywhere: police officers, airport security, even child protective services, workers who were on his payroll." The testimony was being recorded by a court reporter whose fingers flew across her stenotype machine, but everyone in the room understood they were hearing something extraordinary. Elena wasn't just explaining her absence, she was revealing the systematic corruption that had made Marcus Martinez's child trafficking operation possible. I lived in my car for 3 weeks, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I was terrified to go to the police because Marcus had shown me files proving that several officers were part of his network. Finally, a nurse at the emergency room, where I kept returning for treatment, put me in contact with FBI agent Rebecca Torres, no relation to Vincent Torres, Marcus's partner. Agent Torres specialized in organized crime involving children. Michael. Chung handed Elena a tissue and a glass of water. What happened next, Mrs. Rodriguez? Agent Torres explained that the only way to build a case against Marcus was for me to disappear completely. If Marcus thought I was dead or had given up, he might get careless. The FBI gave me a new identity and relocated me to Portland, Oregon. For 5 years, I worked as a waitress during the day and helped the FBI track Marcus's operation at night. Every phone call was monitored. Every financial transaction was traced. Every associate was identified and investigated. Elena's eyes found Detective Sarah Kim in the gallery, and she nodded slightly in acknowledgement. The breakthrough came when Detective Kim raided Marcus's apartment. The evidence she found corroborated everything I had been telling the FBI for years. But more importantly, she found Lily alive. I had been terrified for 5 years that Marcus might have, that something terrible might have happened to my baby. Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Rodriguez, during these 5 years, did you ever attempt to contact your daughter directly? Elena's face crumpled. Every single day, Your Honor. But Agent Torres explained that any contact could compromise the investigation and put Lily in even greater danger. Marcus had associates watching for any sign that I was still alive. If they had discovered I was working with the FBI, they would have killed Lily to eliminate her as a witness and to punish me for my betrayal. She looked directly at Lily, who was staring back with an expression that might have been recognition, confusion, or simply curiosity. Rex, sensing the emotional intensity of the moment, had positioned himself more protectively in front of the little girl. I know I can never get back the 5 years I lost with my daughter, Elena said, her voice breaking. I know that she doesn't remember me, doesn't trust me, maybe doesn't even want me in her life. But I also know that every day I stayed away was a day that brought us closer to this moment, the moment when Marcus's network would finally be destroyed and Lily could be truly safe. As Elena finished her testimony, she noticed something that made her blood freeze. A man in the back row was quietly making his way toward the exit, and something about his movements reminded her of the predatory way Marcus's associates had always moved. She had spent 5 years memorizing faces from FBI surveillance photos, and she was certain she recognized this man as Vincent Torres, the one person from Marcus's organization who had never been caught. Grace Peterson dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled tissue as she approached the witness stand, her husband Tom's reassuring hand briefly touching her shoulder before she stepped forward. At 54, Grace had been a foster mother for over 20 years, opening her home to more than 30 children who needed safety, love, and healing. But none of those children had affected her as profoundly as the silent little girl who had arrived on their doorstep 6 months ago, clutching the collar of a German shepherd and communicating only through tears and trembling. Mrs. Peterson, began the court-appointed advocate, Janet Walsh, please describe Lily's condition when she first came to live with you and your husband. Grace's voice wavered as she began, her memory still fresh and painful. When Detective Kim brought Lily to us that first night, she wouldn't let go of Rex for even a second. The poor child was so thin we could see her ribs through her nightgown. Her hair was matted, and she had these haunted eyes that seemed to look right through you, like she was seeing things that weren't there. Tom Peterson, watching from the gallery beside their 15-year-old daughter Emma, felt his own eyes well up as Grace continued. He remembered that first night vividly, how Lily had stood in their living room like a statue, Rex pressed against her legs, while Grace tried to coax her to sit down, to eat something, to show any sign of being a normal 7-year-old child. The first few weeks were. Grace paused, searching for the right words. Lily wouldn't eat unless Rex tested her food first. She would wake up screaming every single night, but when we tried to comfort her, she would just stare at us, like she didn't understand why anyone would want to help her. The only thing that could calm her down was Rex. Somehow, that dog knew exactly what to do. Janet Walsh nodded encouragingly. Can you describe Rex's behavior during those early days? It was extraordinary, Grace said, her voice gaining strength. Rex seemed to anticipate Lily's needs before she even knew she had them. If she was about to have a panic attack, he would position himself between her and whatever was triggering her fear. When she had nightmares, he learned to wake her gently. By placing his paw on her arm, instead of letting her scream herself awake. During the day, he would guide her away from windows when planes flew overhead. Apparently, the sound of aircraft was one of her worst triggers. What Grace didn't mention, because she didn't fully understand it herself, was the silent communication system she had witnessed developing between Lily and Rex. She had seen the child make tiny gestures that seemed to direct the dog's behavior, but Grace had assumed it was simply a child's natural bonding with a pet. She had no way of knowing that she was observing the evolution of a sophisticated language that would soon prove crucial to Lily's survival. Tom took the stand next, his weathered hands clasping and unclasping as he spoke. As a retired fighter, Tom had seen trauma in many forms, but nothing had prepared him for the complex challenge of helping a child who had been systematically conditioned to distrust the very adults who were trying to save her. Your Honor, Tom said, addressing Judge Harrison directly, I've spent 30 years pulling people out of burning buildings, and I thought I understood what trauma looked like. But Lily, she was like a building that was still on fire inside, even though it looked stable from the outside. Everything we thought we knew about helping children had to be thrown out the window. He described their breakthrough moments. The first time Lily had allowed Grace to brush her hair. The morning she had tentatively pet their family cat. The afternoon she had drawn a picture that wasn't filled with dark, scary shapes. But the real turning point came about 3 months ago, Tom continued. Our daughter Emma was having a sleepover with some friends, and they were watching a movie in the living room. Lily usually avoided groups of people, but for some reason, she came downstairs with Rex. Grace smiled through her tears, remembering the moment Tom was describing. One of Emma's friends started crying during a sad part of the movie, and Lily walked right over to her. She didn't say anything, but she sat down next to this girl she'd never met, and just stayed there until the crying stopped. It was the first time we saw her show empathy for someone else's pain. The court listened intently as Tom continued. That's when we realized that Lily wasn't just healing, she was learning to trust again. And Rex was her translator for everything she couldn't say out loud. When she was happy, Rex would wag his tail more than usual. When she was scared, he would position himself protectively. When she was curious about something, he would lead her toward it. It was like watching a conversation between two beings who understood each other perfectly. Grace returned to the stand for additional questions about Lily's current condition. She's been attending therapy twice a week with Dr. Amanda Foster, and she's made remarkable progress. She speaks in whispers now, mostly to Rex, but sometimes to us. She's been drawing beautiful pictures instead of the dark, frightening images she used to create. And last week, Grace's voice broke with emotion. Last week, she whispered, "Thank you," when I tucked her into bed. It was the first time she'd ever expressed gratitude verbally. But even as Grace testified about Lily's improvements, she noticed something troubling in the courtroom. Rex, who had been calmly lying beside Lily throughout the proceedings, had begun showing subtle signs of agitation. His ears were more alert than usual, his body slightly more tense, and he kept glancing toward the back of the courtroom, where a man in a baseball cap sat watching intently. What Grace didn't realize was that Rex's growing uneasiness wasn't random. It was a direct response to Lily's own escalating anxiety. Through their silent communication system, Lily had been telling Rex about a familiar scent she had detected, a scent that triggered memories of terror from her father's criminal activities. Rex was preparing to protect his charge from a threat that the adults in the room hadn't yet recognized. As Grace finished her testimony with a heartfelt plea for Lily to remain in their care, she had no way of knowing that the man in the back row was already planning his exit strategy, and that the next few minutes would determine whether the healing progress she had just described would continue, or whether it would be violently interrupted by the very criminals from whom they had fought so hard to protect Lily. Judge Patricia Harrison glanced at her watch and noticed that the court proceedings had been running longer than expected. The emotional testimony from Elena Martinez and the Peterson family had created an atmosphere of tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the courtroom. She raised her gavel and announced, "The court will take a 15-minute recess before we hear final arguments. Please remain in your seats or move quietly if you need to step out." The moment Judge Harrison's words echoed through the room, Vincent Torres felt his heart rate spike. He had been sitting in the back row for nearly 3 hours, carefully observing every witness, every piece of evidence, and most importantly, every reaction from the little girl who represented the greatest threat to his criminal empire. What he had heard during Elena's testimony confirmed his worst fears. The FBI had been building a comprehensive case against Marcus Martinez's operation for 5 years, and now they had living witnesses who could destroy everything he had worked to build. Vincent's eyes swept the courtroom one final time, cataloging the positions of the bailiffs, the location of the exits, and the sight lines to where Lily sat with her foster family and that damned German shepherd. He had originally planned to simply observe today's proceedings and assess the threat level. But Elena's detailed testimony about the FBI investigation had changed everything. Lily Martinez wasn't just a traumatized child who might someday recover her memories. She was a ticking time bomb of evidence that could send him to prison for life. As people began to shuffle around during the recess, Vincent slowly stood up, careful to keep his movements casual and unremarkable. He pulled his baseball cap lower over his eyes and began making his way toward the main exit, his mind racing through contingency plans he had hoped he would never need to implement. But just as he reached the aisle, his hand brushed against his jacket pocket, and his fingers made contact with a small electronic device that he had brought as insurance, device that would soon create chaos beyond anything anyone in that courtroom could imagine. Detective Sarah Kim had been watching Vincent's every move for the past hour, her police training allowing her to recognize the subtle body language of someone preparing to flee. The moment he stood up, every instinct she had developed during 15 years of law enforcement began screaming warnings. She carefully reached for her phone to alert courthouse security, but as Vincent started moving toward the exit, something in his posture changed. Instead of the casual walk of someone simply leaving during a recess, his movements became more purposeful, more predatory. That's when Vincent made his crucial mistake. As he passed the row where Lily sat with the Peterson family, he paused. For just a fraction of a second too long, his eyes meeting the little girl's with an intensity that spoke of recognition and threat. In that instant, Lily's entire body went rigid with terror, as suppressed memories came flooding back like a tsunami of horror. The device in Vincent's pocket wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was something far more psychologically devastating. It was a small digital recorder that contained audio files of Marcus Martinez giving orders to his child couriers. including specific instructions that had been drilled into Lily's young mind through months of conditioning. Vincent had planned to use it as leverage if negotiations became necessary, but now he realized it might serve a different purpose entirely. Rex felt the change in Lily before anyone else in the courtroom noticed it. The little girl's breathing became shallow and rapid. Her hands began trembling uncontrollably, and her scent changed in ways that the German Shepherd had learned to associate with extreme psychological distress. Through their silent communication system, Lily was frantically signaling danger in a pattern Rex had never seen before, a complex sequence of micro-movements that conveyed not just fear, but recognition of a specific threat from her past. As Vincent reached the courtroom doors, he turned back for one final look at his target. What he saw made him smile with cold satisfaction. Lily Martinez was clearly in the grip of a full panic attack, her foster mother trying desperately to calm her while the therapy dog pressed protectively against her side. Vincent's presence had already accomplished part of what he had come to do. It had demonstrated to the traumatized child that Marcus Martinez's network was still active, still watching, still capable of reaching her, even in what should have been the safest possible environment. But Vincent had underestimated both Detective Kim's vigilance and Rex's protective instincts. As he pushed open the courtroom doors, Sarah Kim was already moving, her hand on her service weapon and her voice sharp as she called out, "Security! Stop that man!" Simultaneously, Rex was responding to Lily's distress signals in a way that no one in the courtroom had ever witnessed before. The German Shepherd's body language shifted from protective to aggressive. His training as both a therapy dog and a former police canine unit washout suddenly becoming relevant in ways his handlers had never anticipated. Vincent Torres had spent years operating in the shadows, manipulating vulnerable children and corrupting adults through fear and greed. He had always been the predator, never the prey. But as courthouse security officers began moving toward him, and as Rex's low growl filled the air with unmistakable warning, Vincent realized that he had made a critical error in judgment. He had assumed that a traumatized child and her therapy dog would be easy targets, but he was about to discover that some bonds are forged in trauma, but strengthened by love, and those bonds can become more dangerous to predators than any weapon. The small device in Vincent's pocket began to emit a soft beeping sound as his sweaty palm accidentally activated it. The sound was barely audible to most people in the courtroom, but to Lily's trained ears that had been conditioned to respond to specific audio cues during her years as an unwilling courier, the beeping represented something far more terrifying than any physical threat. It was the sound of her father's voice, about to give her instructions that she had been programmed to obey, no matter how much terror and pain those instructions might cause. As chaos began to erupt around them, Rex prepared to do something that would forever change how everyone in that courtroom understood the relationship between human and animal, between victim and protector, between past trauma and present strength. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Detective Sarah Kim's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Security, stop that man." Vincent Torres had made it halfway to the exit when two courthouse bailiffs moved to intercept him, their hands instinctively moving toward their weapons as they recognized the urgency in Detective Kim's command. But Vincent was already in motion, his years of evading law enforcement kicking in as he pulled the small electronic device from his pocket. "Nobody move!" Vincent shouted, holding the device above his head like a grenade. "This courtroom is about to learn the truth about little Lily Martinez." His thumb hovered over a red button on the device, and the soft beeping that had been barely audible suddenly amplified into a sharp, rhythmic pulse that filled the air with mechanical precision. Judge Harrison's gavel crashed down repeatedly as she shouted for order, but her voice was lost in the pandemonium. People were diving under benches. Others were pushing toward the exits, and several bailiffs had drawn their weapons, creating a standoff that could turn deadly in seconds. But amidst all the chaos, the most devastating destruction was happening silently in the mind of 7-year-old Lily Martinez. The beeping sound from Vincent's device was no random alarm. It was the exact audio cue that Marcus Martinez had used to activate his daughter's conditioning during her years as an unwilling drug courier. Lily's small body began convulsing as buried memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was no longer sitting in a safe courtroom, surrounded by people who loved her. In her mind, she was back in her father's apartment, receiving instructions for another terrifying trip across international borders. Grace Peterson tried desperately to comfort Lily, her arms wrapping around the trembling child. But Lily was lost in a flashback, so vivid and overwhelming that she couldn't distinguish between past and present. Her breathing became dangerously shallow. Her eyes rolled back, and for a moment, it seemed as though she might lose consciousness entirely. The trauma that Dr. Amanda Foster and the Peterson family had worked so hard to heal was being weaponized against her by a man who saw her not as a child, but as a threat to be eliminated. Rex felt Lily's distress through every fiber of his being. Their months of silent communication had created a bond so profound that the German Shepherd could sense her emotional state as clearly as his own heartbeat. But what was happening to Lily now was unlike anything Rex had experienced during their time together. The terror radiating from her small body was so intense that it triggered something deep within. Rex's own genetic memory, an ancient canine instinct to protect the pack at all costs. Elena Martinez, still on the witness stand from her earlier testimony, watched in horror as her daughter relived the worst moments of her young life. "Turn it off," she screamed at Vincent, tears streaming down her face. "She's just a baby. Please, turn it off." But Vincent's cold smile told Elena everything she needed to know. This wasn't an accident or a moment of desperation. This was calculated psychological torture designed to break Lily's mind before she could ever testify against his criminal network. Tom Peterson lunged toward Vincent, his firefighter instincts overriding any concern for his own safety, but one of the bailiffs caught his arm. "Stay back, sir. We've got this." But even as the bailiff spoke, it was clear that nobody really had control of the situation. Vincent Torres held all the cards, a room full of hostages, a psychological weapon that was destroying a child's sanity, and the desperate advantage of a cornered criminal with nothing left to lose. It was in that moment of absolute chaos and desperation that something extraordinary happened. Lily, lost in the nightmare of her conditioning, managed to focus her terror-filled eyes on Rex. Despite the audio assault that was tearing her mind apart, despite the flashbacks that were dragging her back to the worst moments of her life, despite the overwhelming urge to obey the commands that had been drilled into her consciousness, Lily found the strength to communicate one final message to her beloved companion. What she conveyed to Rex wasn't a word or a gesture that anyone else in the courtroom could have recognized. It was something far more profound, a communication that transcended the limitations of human language and touched the deepest levels of trust and understanding that can exist between two living beings. In that instant of perfect clarity amidst the chaos, Lily told Rex everything he needed to know about Vincent Torres, about the device that was torturing her, and about what needed to happen to make it stop. Rex's response was immediate and unlike anything anyone in that courtroom had ever witnessed. The German Shepherd's entire body language shifted as he processed Lily's silent command. His ears flattened against his head, his muscles tensed with purpose, and his intelligent eyes locked onto Vincent Torres with a focus so intense it seemed to freeze time itself. But what Rex did next wasn't an attack or an act of aggression. It was something far more sophisticated and devastating. Judge Patricia Harrison, who had been shouting orders and banging her gavel in a futile attempt to restore order, suddenly stopped mid-sentence and stared at the remarkable scene unfolding before her. Rex had positioned himself in the exact center of the courtroom between Vincent and Lily, and was performing a series of movements so precise and deliberate that they seemed almost choreographed. The German Shepherd was demonstrating something that would forever change how everyone in that room understood the capacity for communication between human and animal. As Rex continued his extraordinary display, Vincent Torres found himself frozen in place, his thumb still hovering over the device's button. Something about the dog's behavior was so unexpected, so far beyond anything he had planned for, that his criminal mind, trained to anticipate and counter human responses, simply couldn't process what he was witnessing. The psychological weapon that had seemed so powerful just moments before was becoming irrelevant in the face of a form of communication that operated on levels Vincent couldn't even comprehend. The silent command had been given, and Rex was about to show everyone in that courtroom that some bonds are stronger than fear, some love is more powerful than conditioning, and some truths can only be spoken in the language of absolute trust between two beings who understand each other perfectly. What Rex did next defied every assumption the courtroom held about the limitations of animal intelligence and the boundaries of interspecies communication. The German Shepherd began moving with a purposefulness that seemed to transcend his training. As a therapy dog, demonstrating abilities that suggested he had been far more than just a passive witness to the horrors of horrors. Lily's past. Rex's first movement was toward Elena Martinez, who was still frozen on the witness stand, her face streaked with tears as she watched her daughter's psychological torment. But instead of offering simple comfort, Rex did something that made Elena gasp with recognition. The dog gently took her trembling hand in his mouth, not biting, but guiding with the precise pressure of someone who had done this before. He led her down from the witness stand and positioned her directly beside Lily, then used his nose to guide Elena's hands to specific locations on her daughter's small body. "Oh my God," Elena whispered as Rex directed her fingers to barely visible scars on Lily's wrist marks from restraints used during her conditioning. Then to older scars on her ankles, evidence of the chains Marcus had used to prevent her from running during training sessions. Rex somehow knew exactly where each mark of abuse was hidden beneath Lily's clothing, as if he had been cataloging every injury for months, waiting for the moment when this evidence would be needed. Judge Harrison leaned forward in her chair, her 30 years of legal experience telling her she was witnessing something unprecedented. Rex wasn't just comforting a traumatized child, he was providing testimony. The dog was systematically revealing evidence that no human witness could have known about, demonstrating a level of observation and memory that challenged everything she thought she understood about animal cognition. Detective Sarah Kim, still keeping Vincent Torres in her line of sight, felt her heart racing as she began to understand the implications of what Rex was showing them. During her investigation of Marcus Martinez's operation, she had found training manuals that described how the traffickers conditioned their child couriers. But she had never found physical evidence of the specific techniques used on Lily. Rex was providing that evidence now, using his body language and positioning to tell a story that human investigators had been unable to piece together. But Rex's most extraordinary demonstration was yet to come. The German Shepherd left Elena and Lily and walked purposefully toward the evidence table where Detective Kim had placed items recovered from Marcus Martinez's apartment. The bailiffs tensed, unsure whether to stop him, but Judge Harrison held up her hand. Something in the dog's behavior suggested this wasn't random. It was deliberate and important. Rex stopped in front of a box of documents and began exhibiting behavior that made everyone in the courtroom hold their breath. He sat perfectly still for several seconds, then performed a complex sequence of movements, touching his nose to specific files, then looking back at Lily, then returning to touch the same documents again. Detective Kim realized with growing amazement that Rex was identifying evidence, not just any evidence, but specifically the documents that related to Lily's role in the trafficking operation. "He knows," Sarah whispered, loud enough for Judge Harrison to hear. "Somehow, he knows which files contain information about Lily's abuse." Vincent Torres, who had been frozen in shocked silence as he watched Rex's unprecedented display, suddenly understood the true magnitude of the threat he faced. The dog wasn't just Lily's therapy companion. He was a witness who had been present during Marcus's criminal activities, and his canine memory had retained details that could destroy Vincent's entire operation. The device in Vincent's hand suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate compared to the living, breathing evidence that Rex represented. But the most miraculous moment was still to come. Rex returned to Lily, who was still trembling from the psychological assault of the audio device, and did something that no one in the courtroom could have predicted. The German Shepherd positioned himself directly in front of the little girl and began a gentle, rhythmic movement with his paws, a specific pattern that seemed to counter the harsh beeping of Vincent's device. Elena gasped as she recognized what Rex was doing. "It's the calming sequence," she whispered to Grace Peterson. "Marcus used to terrorize Lily with sounds and signals, but somehow Rex learned to reverse the conditioning. He's using counter-programming to break her out of the flashback." The effect was immediate and profound. As Rex continued his precise movements, Lily's breathing began to slow and deepen. Her eyes, which had been rolled back in terror, gradually focused on her beloved companion. The trembling in her small body began to subside as Rex's gentle counter-conditioning broke through years of psychological manipulation. And then, for the first time since Vincent Torres had activated his cruel device, Lily Martinez spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the hushed courtroom, every word carried the weight of absolute truth. "Rex remembers everything," she said, her small hand reaching out to touch the German Shepherd's head. "He was there when Daddy hurt me. He saw the bad men who took me on scary trips. He knows where they hid the drugs and the money and the pictures of other kids like me." Judge Harrison felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the full import of what Lily was revealing. Rex wasn't just a therapy dog who had learned to comfort a traumatized child. He was potentially the most important witness in the biggest child trafficking case the court system had ever seen. Vincent Torres's psychological weapon had backfired spectacularly. Instead of breaking Lily's spirit, it had triggered the emergence of her voice and revealed the extraordinary partnership between girl and dog that would ultimately bring justice to countless victims. The device slipped from his nerveless fingers as he realized that his criminal empire was about to crumble, brought down not by sophisticated law enforcement techniques, but by the unbreakable bond between a little girl and the remarkable dog, who had chosen to be her protector, her translator, and her witness to the truth. Rex had just demonstrated that some forms of communication transcend species. Some memories are too important to forget, and some love is powerful enough to heal even the deepest wounds while demanding justice for those who inflict them. Judge Patricia Harrison sat in stunned silence for a full minute after Lily's whispered words echoed through the courtroom. In her 30 years on the bench, she had presided over thousands of cases involving child welfare, custody disputes, and criminal proceedings, but nothing had prepared her for what she had just witnessed. The profound communication between Lily Martinez and Rex had transcended every legal precedent she knew, challenging the very foundations of how testimony and evidence were traditionally presented in a court of law. "In all my years serving the cause of justice," Judge Harrison finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "I have never witnessed such extraordinary communication between a child and her guardian. What I have observed here today goes beyond the scope of typical therapy animal assistance. This represents a form of testimony that speaks to the deepest truths about trauma, recovery, and the remarkable capacity for healing that exists when trust is absolute. Vincent Torres had collapsed into a chair, the electronic device lying shattered on the floor where it had fallen from his trembling hands. The psychological weapon that was supposed to break Lily's spirit had instead catalyzed the most damning testimony his criminal network could face. FBI agent Rebecca Torres, no relation to Vincent, despite the shared surname, who had been coordinating the federal investigation from outside the courtroom, burst through the doors with a team of agents, just as Judge Harrison was rendering her custody decision. "Your Honor," Agent Torres announced, slightly out of breath, "we have warrants for Vincent Torres's arrest on charges of child trafficking, conspiracy, and ongoing criminal enterprise. Based on what we've heard through the courtroom audio feed, we also have grounds to expand our investigation into the full scope of this trafficking network." The months that followed Lily's testimony would prove to be a turning point, not just for her own healing, but for dozens of other children who had been trapped in Marcus Martinez's criminal web. Rex's extraordinary memory, combined with Lily's growing ability to translate his observations, provided investigators with a roadmap to evidence caches, safe houses, and financial networks that had remained hidden for years. Working with FBI specialists trained in animal-assisted investigations, a field that expanded rapidly after Rex's courtroom performance, they were able to rescue 23 children from active trafficking situations and identify 37 additional victims who were living with foster families, many of whom had never been properly identified as trafficking survivors. Dr. Amanda Foster, Lily's therapist, found herself at the center of a revolution in trauma therapy. The case study, documenting Lily and Rex's communication breakthrough, became required reading in psychology programs nationwide. What we learned from Lily and Rex, Dr. Foster explained in her landmark paper published in the Journal of Trauma and Recovery, is that healing doesn't always follow the pathways we expect. Sometimes the most profound recovery happens when we create space for forms of communication that transcend traditional therapeutic boundaries. Elena Martinez was awarded full custody of her daughter, but the reunion was gradual and carefully managed. The first meeting between mother and daughter after the trial took place in the Peterson family's backyard, with Rex serving as both protector and translator. Lily would look at Rex before responding to anything I said, Elena later recalled. It was like she needed his permission to trust me again, and honestly, I was grateful for that. Rex knew her in ways that I was still learning. The Peterson family's role in Lily's life evolved from foster care to chosen family. Tom and Grace legally adopted the title of godparents, ensuring that Lily would always have the stability and security that had been so crucial to her initial healing. Their daughter Emma became the big sister Lily had never had, and the two girls developed their own form of communication that helped Lily practice expressing herself with peers her own age. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Rex himself. The German shepherd who had entered Lily's life as a therapy dog, trained to provide comfort and stability, evolved into something unprecedented. Canine witness whose testimony helped dismantle one of the largest child trafficking networks in federal law enforcement history. The FBI established the Rex Protocol, a specialized training program designed to work with animals who had been present during criminal activities, recognizing that their memories could provide crucial evidence that human witnesses might be unable or unwilling to provide. 2 years after the trial, Lily stood before a congressional committee investigating child trafficking, Rex at her side as always. At 9 years old, she had become an articulate advocate for other survivors, but she still relied on her silent communication with Rex when the memories became too difficult to bear. "People always ask me what Rex taught me," she told the assembled lawmakers, her voice clear and strong. "But I think what he really did was show me that love doesn't need words, it needs trust. And when you trust someone completely, you can survive anything. The criminal network that Marcus Martinez and Vincent Torres had built was completely dismantled. Vincent received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Marcus, cooperating from prison in hopes of a reduced sentence, provided information that led to the arrest of 43 additional conspirators across 12 states. The children who were rescued received specialized care based on the therapeutic breakthroughs discovered through Lily's case. On a warm spring evening, exactly 3 years after that fateful day in Judge Harrison's courtroom, Lily Martinez celebrated her 10th birthday in the Peterson family's backyard. Elena, healthy and radiant after years of therapy and rebuilding her life, watched as her daughter laughed with Emma and their friends. Rex, now graying slightly around his muzzle, but still alert and protective, lay contentedly in the shade. His remarkable blue eyes, keeping watch over the family he had helped to heal and bring together. As the sun set, Lily approached Rex and performed a series of subtle gestures that no one else noticed. Rex's tail wagged gently, and he touched his nose to her hand, their private language now used not for survival or testimony, but simply for the joy of understanding each other perfectly. They had proven that some bonds transcend species, some love conquers even the deepest trauma, and some truths can only be told in the language of absolute trust between beings who choose to protect each other against all odds.